Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me thank you for coming. Um, I'm anchoring this afternoon what is the first post cabinet press conference on a regular basis. I indicated, I think, the last time we met that we would have, and perhaps post cabinet press conference is an appropriate phrase because the cabinet meetings are still going on. We've taken a break to be able to come to you to report, and we'll do so twice a month. My press secretary, Mr. Morris, will help manage these occasions in future. But I felt that since this was the first one, I had an obligation to be here with you and to be able to help us have a more regular communication, and also for Barbadians to better understand the process that is involved on a Thursday that helps keep the executive of this country going. Um, we propose to deal with those matters which would have engaged us today primarily, and therefore I'm going to invite the key ministers. Obviously, this does not in any way, and every week will not, every time we hold it, will not in any way reflect the entire agenda of Cabinet. Cabinet deals with a range of issues from taking minutes to dealing with travel papers to dealing with policy brief papers for legislation for drafting, and I'll deal with one of them shortly, as well as major policy papers. It is our intention to share primarily major policy papers that and major decisions of an executive nature that will affect Barbadians across the board. It is against that background that we intend to be able to have three ministers of government share with you this afternoon. The Minister of Information is also here because she, with Mr. Morris, will help ensure that these processes are managed on an ongoing basis. But this afternoon, we are choosing to share with you, from those three ministers and myself, matters that affect our ministry. And I'd like to start with Minister Abrams. This afternoon, Cabinet addressed a major issue that will come, I think, to be regarded as a significant decision because it seeks to change or start the process of changing a 1964 policy decision as it relates to our water and water zoning, groundwater resources and water zoning. Minister Abrams.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, the cabinet approved. sorry. Today, the cabinet approved the preparation of a green paper for introduction to cabinet to Parliament as soon as possible. Barbados's last groundwater protection policy was, as the Prime Minister said, back in, I believe, 1964, and it has not been looked at since. Studies have shown that the information which informed those policies and that policy is now obsolete. It is archaic, it is out of date, it is no longer relevant. It concentrated primarily on bacterial contamination and how the zones were set. Everybody knows of zone 1 to 5, zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, zone 5. And the delineation of these zones was based on the amount of time a molecule of water took from reaching the outer limit of the zone to the water catchment area. And this was informed by the life of bacteria. So you wanted sufficient time, for example, in zone 1, that if contaminated water was to start to soak through from the surface, it would have sufficient time for the bacteria to break down and be no longer a threat by the time it hit the water table. And as we said back then, the concern was bacteria. The concern was bacteria from like feces or contamination like that. But we've since advanced, and one of the major contaminants to water is not the bacteria, but nitrates. So nitrates from fertilizer, you still get the nitrates from sewage, etc. But once upon a time, if you did agriculture in zone 1, that was deemed to be okay. Zone 1 was for agriculture. but we now know that all types of agriculture cannot go on in Zone 1. So we had to look entirely at the policy, the permitted uses of land, and we are now ready to lay before Parliament the new water zone and water protection and land use zoning policy, the green paper. When we introduce it to Parliament, it will then be dispersed, published and circulated among the wider public. We will have consultations on it. We want feedback from as many stakeholders as possible. We want the public to air their views and their concerns. And at the end of that process, we will fine-tune and finalize what will constitute the new water protection and land use policy for Barbados. Some of the features of the new policy: we no longer have zones 1 to 5, we now have instead zones A to E. Zone A is a strict exclusion zone, which is smaller in area than the existing Zone 1, with no new developments and restricted agriculture. Zone B is a pathogen management zone with stricter rules for sewage treatment and disposal. Zone C is a chemicals management zone. Zone D is a recharge controlling zone, which encompasses the rest of the area in the limestone area with continued standards for wastewater treatment. And Zone E is a non-recharge contributing area, principally Scotland districts and areas where water does not actually soak through. One of the features of our policy is that we no longer look at our water zoning in terms of the water table alone, but you also have to look at Barbados as one large coastal area, and the focus is now on prevention rather than cure. So we are now not just looking as to what do we do with the water when it comes to the aquifer if it is contaminated. The focus is now on stopping contamination from happening to the aquifers, to the water catchment areas, and also contamination in the coastal areas. So one of the spin-offs of this is some area is freed up for development. So as Zone 1, which is the new Zone A, you recover, or there's about 40% more land area that is not completely excluded from development. So there is restricted development, there's controlled development, but it is not completely excluded. We're not just looking at a blanket exclusion. We are practical. Barbados has a finite amount of land area, so we have to look at ways in which the land area can be used, if even used with conditions. So we're looking, for example, at Surin the Bell. The Bell has been a hot topic for Barbadians, and the reality is settlements exist in the Bell. What can we do to minimize any effects of these? One of the developments coming out of this policy is that we're looking to sewer the Bell and other vulnerable areas like that. So we don't have necessarily to move people, but we can also work at protecting our water resources. In the ideal situation, we sewer the whole country, but that is not practical at this point in time. We also are looking at the uses of the other zones. How do we maximize the use of the zone? Because land is a practical resource. If you have land and you can't use it, it's of no benefit to you, it's of no benefit to anybody. So we have to look at the ways that we can use the land to get the maximum benefit from the land while causing the minimum harm to the environment and to the water table. So another thing we're looking at is we're trying to get away from suck wells being the primary source of wastewater sewage treatment in the island. In Barbados, when people build a house, you automatically move your mind towards digging a suck well. But is that the best way to go? If you think about it, the information, or what would have informed the first creation of the zones, as in the time of travel of a water molecule till it hits the aquifer, a nonsense is made of that by a suck well, because you're effectively digging right down to the point where you get maximum extraction of the liquid from what is put there. So whereas you may have looked initially at a 300-day time of travel for a molecule of water, if you have a suck well in the same spot, then that suck well, that molecule of water is going to probably reach the water table in less than 40 or 50 days. So it is a bit of a culture shift for Barbadians. We're looking initially at the new developments. How do we incorporate this now into building standards going forward? How can the government work with people to make it happen? There's a cost to all of these things, and it can't be borne. It's not practical to expect everybody in Barbados to be able to do the best practice initially. We're going to look at having to grandfather some people into the new system, and we're also looking with the Water Authority is going to work with the people of Barbados to institute a program whereby we can help you to change out your devices to water saving devices. We are a water scarce country. There's some argument as to whether we are actually water scarce, or if the water that we have is just not reaching the people it's supposed to reach. But the fact remains, while we're trying to conserve water, while we're trying to harvest water, while we're trying to collect water, we also need to change the practices that we take for granted. So when we go into, a lot of you, when you go into shower, you turn the shower and you bathe and you keep the shower until you're finished. When you're brushing your teeth, you turn your tap and you brush your teeth until it's finished. Water is very, very cheap in Barbados. There's almost no incentive for people in Barbados to conserve water. We are among the cheapest, we have among the cheapest water in the world. But if everybody is not getting the water because we have an aging distribution system, with some pipes being 150 years old, then we have to conserve the water that we do use in order for it to be a more equitable distribution, to allow people further down the line to be able to access the water that we take for granted. So all of these things are covered and touched in this new green paper. I'm excited because it is a shift. We have done the same thing since 1964. Back in 2007, this idea of a new water zoning policy was initiated by the gentleman sitting right next to me, who at the time was the minister responsible for water, and a study was commissioned. That study, I believe, was completed in 2011. The government changed shortly after the instructions were given, and Dr. Walcott pioneered it. And although the study was completed in 2011 and a lot of the information was there, it sat on a desk in a cupboard until the government changed. But we accept that we cannot continue the way we have been. We are all aware of the water issues that especially people in the northern areas are facing. The consumption of water is also directly related to the amount of sewage that we produce and that we have to dispose of. At the end of the day, we're going to have to look at the reuse of our sewage as well, or reclaimed water. So it is going to be a major shift in our perception and treatment of water, or perception and treatment of wastewater, or perception and treatment of drinking water. One other thing that we need to consider is all the water that comes with the pipe in Barbados is potable water. All the water that you turn on your tap and you access is water that's suitable for drinking. So that same water that you can drink is what you use to wash your car, is what you use to irrigate fields, is what goes to manufacturing, everything. It makes no sense to use that most valuable resource for purposes that do not require that standard of water. Why treat water up to the optimal standard? We have among some of the best water in the world, but then use that water to water plants, or water a golf course, or water or wash cars, or in a car wash. So we have to prioritize. We have to view water as a commodity that has a purpose. So water that is treated to a certain level gets used for a purpose which is acceptable for that level. The best treated water is used for drinking water. So all of these things inform the policy. As I said, it's exciting days. It is a complete water revolution. I really want to thank the Prime Minister, who has been pushing and knocking at this door from the time the government changed, actually from before the government changed. And it has taken a while for us to get here, but we are here. So I look forward to introducing this to Parliament. I look forward to its dissemination to the public. We are anxious at the Water Authority and in the Ministry to hear the feedback, so that we can, at the end of the day, present and provide the best policy that suits the needs of the majority of people and fulfills the mandate of the Barbados Water Authority, which is to deliver safe, efficient, affordable, and reliable water to the people of
I
Barbados.
think Minister, you may want to address how this increases land for development that was hitherto out of production or used for development as well.
There is a lot, because of the previous restrictions, a lot of land, especially in the Zone 1 area, was locked off from development. The Zone 1 in particular, and a lot of Zone 2 as well. By reallocating the zones based on our treatment of sewage, based on preventative measures from contamination of the aquifers and the water collection areas, we have managed to free up about 4% of the land area, more than 4% of the total land area in Barbados for further development. So this allows us to find more land for housing. It allows us to find more land, actually more land for agriculture, because some of the Zone 1 areas were blocked off from agriculture. So it is not just, it is really a water protection policy, but there are many spin-off benefits that affect everybody. So I am glad that we looked at it, looking at it, examining it, revealed a lot to us. We have resources that we have not tapped because restrictions were there, but it has been proven that these restrictions actually do not need to be there anymore. From the change to Zone 1, from Zone 1 to Zone A, we freed up 5% of the land area.
No. You
Sorry,
freed up half of the land
we freed
area
up half of these previous Zone
from
1 land area.
kilometers to 23.
So we've gone from 33
From
square,
39. Yeah, I
39
need
square
glasses,
kilometers.
my gentleman.
We've gone from 39.3 square kilometers to 23 square kilometers in the new Zone A. In Zone 2, which was 55.9 square kilometers, we are now down to 46 square kilometers, and there's a reduction in each of the corresponding zones. So that much land is now being freed up for purposes that were previously blocked from it. So we should now have a little bit more land for development and a lot more breathing space as we attempt to develop Barbados, provide housing, and to spur economic activity.
While still protecting the groundwater resources and the coastal waters.
While still protecting the groundwater resources and the coastal waters.
Thank you, Minister. We're going to come back to questions to everyone after, but I'd like to invite Minister Walcott now for ease of reference to address issues pertaining to another major decision taken by the Cabinet today with respect to visa abolition for a number of countries with which Barbados has relations.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the press. You'll recall that during the election last year, in terms of our manifesto, we spoke about engaging the world. And in foreign affairs, this is what we've set out to achieve, recognizing that in the area of globalization and the issues within the world, it's a different world in terms of the interactions between countries, in terms of trade, and in terms of tourism. 3 weeks ago, as a result of this and moving in this direction, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs brought to Cabinet and was approved a paper for Barbados to establish relations with 30 countries from which we didn't have relations before. We recognize it is important for us to strengthen the relationship with the present countries with which we've been doing business for several years, and indeed to make new friends, so to speak, in the global world and to seek new opportunities. And in terms of Barbados, we depend on tourism, we depend on investment and opportunities for business. And in this regard, we recognize that in terms of travel, that the stipulations in terms of having visas are sometimes a deterrent for tourists and indeed persons who are seeking to establish business and interact with the country. They find it fairly complicated. In this regard, the Cabinet of Barbados today agreed to remove the requirements for visas for a number of countries in different parts of the world. We recognize that Africa is a continent of 54 countries, many of them showing growth rates of 5, 6, 7% in terms of Rwanda. And it is time for us to look more closely at that continent some of you would be aware that we have made a pledge and are moving towards establishing a mission in Accra, Ghana before the end of this year. In this regard, we have agreed to remove visa requirements from countries such as Cameroon, Ethiopia, Ghana, Liberia, Morocco, Senegal, Rwanda, and indeed Burkina Faso. We've also looked into the Gulf states, recognizing in terms of tourism and again in terms of possible investment in removing visa requirements from countries like Bahrain, Jordan, Oman, Qatar. We've looked at Asia, and in this regard we also recognize the growth of countries like Vietnam and Thailand and the need for persons from those areas to possibly visit and to invest in Barbados. And in this regard, we've also agreed to remove visa requirements for countries like Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam. And of course, more recently, we have a presence in Monaco with an honorary consul in Monaco, and requirements for visas were imposed on countries like Monaco. And also this evening, we have agreed to remove those restrictions, recognizing and certainly hoping that the removal of these visa requirements would encourage a number of persons from these countries, not only in terms of tourism, but also in terms of possibility for investment and business. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to invite Minister Simmons to address issues pertaining to the National Cruise Development Commission and tourism generally. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Excuse me, I forgot to mention India.
I was about to
Most
ask you about
important.
it. Say that again.
I forgot to mention India. How can I?
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, good evening. As the Prime Minister indicated, we are now in possession of the completed report of the National Cruise Development Commission, and I would like to begin on behalf of not only my ministry, but I think on behalf of all of my colleagues in Cabinet, by thanking the members of the Cruise Commission, all 15 of them, who worked very diligently and displayed a tremendous sense of patriotism and selflessness, working without recompense to give us a very comprehensive and detailed and I think very useful final report. You all will remember that it was in July last year that the Prime Minister mandated that we identify workable solutions to challenges facing the cruise sector. And that was the subject of the Cruise Development Commission's investigation. In a nutshell, the findings are essentially that the country was largely flying blind with respect to the cruise side of tourism in Barbados. There were no evaluations being taken, and we really did not take stock of our weaknesses and areas of underperformance. And there are unfortunately several of them. The first issue, of course, is the question of spend. I've spoken to this before, and we feel that the issue of spend is perhaps the most important aspect of the tourism challenges facing this country. The average transit passenger coming to Barbados in 2014, 2015 would have been spending around $75 per person. By 2017, 2018, that then would have fallen to $65 per person. Across this region, on average, you have the average transit passenger spending roughly $100 per person, and in the top category of the destinations, the spend per person is around $200. So we were not only far from the top, but we were disastrously below the average. And obviously that is a state of affairs which is simply not good enough. The second issue, of course, is that of the visitor experience, and the Prime Minister has articulated this very well in the past. We have passengers coming off of a cruise ship, and their first experience is to intermingle with the onions and the potatoes. We have a physical infrastructure challenge that has to be dealt with, and that perhaps is at a very macro level. But the visitor experience, as detailed by the Cruise Commission report, goes beyond that, and some of them are very basic micro level issues which reflect not only on how we treat to the cruise sector or how we treat to the tourism sector, but quite frankly, how we treat to Barbadians as Barbadians ourselves. So for me, they represent low-hanging fruit. Among them, of course, is the fact that there are very few bathrooms to be found in Bridgetown. We have a capital city which is hosting long stay and short stay visitors. But we treat ourselves this way. There is no adequate facility for persons with disabilities to get around Bridgetown with ease. And again, that reflects on how we treat ourselves as Barbadians as well. And obviously, there's a need to prioritize improvements in these matters and across the sector. So Cabinet today deliberated on this, and we've set up 3 working committees. We will keep the Cruise Commission together, but in 3 working committees. The first committee will be dealing with attractions and experiences. The coordinator of that during the life of the commission was Roseanne Myers, and that will continue. The second one is Bridgetown and National Tours, the reimagination and redevelopment of Bridgetown, and also the assessment of National Tours. Mr. Dean Straker has been working on that, and he continues to take the lead. And Mr. Errol Humphrey, who was the chair of the committee, of the commission, will be the lead for the continuing work that we have to do on air and seaports, and also the question of retail and craft. A number of recommendations have come out of the body of work that the Commission has done, and the Prime Minister has agreed that this is of sufficient national significance that we must lay this document in Parliament so as to galvanize the entire country around the effort that has to be made, because we are a home porting destination. We are obviously a major tourism destination, but we cannot allow a major part or plank of the tourism effort to suffer without bringing the whole country's attention to where the weaknesses are, and to try to build out a level of resilience so that we can make ourselves far more competitive than we have hitherto been. If I could just give you an idea as to some of the low-hanging fruit that Cabinet has agreed on, we will in short order be moving to create some visitor kiosks around Barbados, but more importantly within Bridgetown, we must have the facilities that allow for proper basic bathroom amenities. That is an inescapable point of departure. Again, around Barbados, but also in Bridgetown, we must have proper signage. And we have to leverage the UNESCO World Heritage designation that we have not satisfactorily used so far for historic Bridgetown and its garrison, so that we will build out tours of the area and make sure that both by day and by night there will be a tourism product that will be second to none in what is really the region's most historic city. The development of the Bridgetown fisheries into more than just a fish market experience. I have said this with respect to oysters, and I believe that it is entirely doable with respect to Bridgetown Fish Market as well. Tourists want to have an immersive experience. They want to get their hands dirty. They want to learn to do the things that we do in Barbados, inclusive of how to prepare fish, whether it's flying fish, dolphin, whatever. And the idea of scaling, boning, the idea of how you prepare, season, etc. And of course, how we grill the food and then to wash it down with some Banks beer, etc. is a holistic experience. And as you think about it, it is easy to flesh it out, because you can then have tourists learning how to cast nets and how to make nets and how to do so from a Moses, etc. It becomes something that is fun, something that from all ages you can participate in, and that essentially is what we have been made to understand through all the research that the tourists want to do, and we have to be authentic about it, set ourselves apart from the rest of the region, and offer things that are not easily found elsewhere. There's obviously some low-hanging fruit with regard to the need to have proper street pedestrian crossings for pedestrians on Travers Way, so that they can more easily access Pelican. You are aware, I am sure by now, that there is an effort to rejuvenate Pelican by Night with a craft market experience. But again, to get the maximum out of it, we need to be able to make sure that people can cross that highway very comfortably by day and by night. And of course, the issue of water taxis is also on the radar, because again, it lends to the total coastal experience for us to be able to move people via a new form of, and a relaxed form of transportation from Speightstown to the inner basin of the Corinage, and from the inner basin of the Corinage up to Oistins, and vice versa. That basically is some of the, or that reflects some of the issues coming out of the Cruise Commission report and our deliberations on it, and the priorities that we have set up as the immediate, low-hanging, achievable ways to overcome some of the challenges we have. If I may, Prime Minister, I should also say that Cabinet also reflected today on the question of the regulatory environment for the wider tourism sector, in the accommodation aspect of our tourism sector. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, since 1982, the regulations which govern the accommodation sector in Barbados fell into obsolescence. We created a BTA Act, Barbados Tourism Authority, and with that, the 1982 regulations ceased to function. But there was no savings clause created in law, so that administrative acts by way of regulating the accommodation sector really and truly were not and are not valid. And that continued even after the creation of the BTMI and the BTPA in 2013-14. So that it has fallen on this government to correct that situation and bring all administrative acts of the past governments into a state where there is accuracy and certainty of law. And Cabinet today has approved the paper which I brought, which allows us now to go to Parliament in order to correct that deficiency in our legislative arrangements with respect to the proper governance of the accommodation sector in the tourism industry.
I think once you lay the Commission's report, people will see other things like free Wi-Fi, or the enhancing of the green areas of Bridgetown, etc. Thank you. The last matter we'll address very briefly. Cabinet also agreed today to give drafting instructions to the Attorney General to have the Chief Parliamentary Council draft a piece of legislation that will allow us to establish the major organized crimes and anti-corruption agency. In the estimates this year, you'll see an amount voted to be able to get it off the ground of $1 million for anti-corruption. But government doesn't happen by just simply saying we want something to happen. You have to set up an established framework, and in this case, it is required to both have legislation and then personnel. Cabinet also agreed that Colonel Quinton, former head of the Barbados Defence Force, will be assisting as the expert in helping us to get this major crimes and anti-corruption agency off the ground. Before we get to the stage of hiring anyone else, we need to have the legislative framework, and the Attorney General is something that is known in other Commonwealth territories, but the Attorney General has to bring legislation that first allows the agency to be established, that sets out what the powers of the agency will be, that sets out what its responsibilities will be, sets out who it is intended to work with, for example, the Royal Barbados Police Force, the Financial Intelligence Unit, the Office of Director of Public Prosecutions, etc., that those are the local entities it may work with, but it will also work with overseas entities as required, and those will be known as strategic partners. There will be an oversight committee, for example, that the legislation will have to provide for, to ensure that the persons acting in that agency are accountable in the same way that you have a police complaints authority to hold policemen accountable. But effectively, what is intended is for the investigations to be done, and more likely than not for the police then working in partnership with them to do the arrests, so that we have a dedicated agency that comes to work every day to help us fight corruption and to fight major organized crime and terrorism. in this world. You can't be a country with open borders and not be susceptible to all kinds of threats. And it is our intention to be able to protect Barbados as far as we can. So, ladies and gentlemen, that represents the core of what we are reporting on today. As I said, the Cabinet also dealt with other matters. For example, the usual delegation to the International Labour Organization Conference. This week we were privileged enough to actually have the Director General of the International Labour Organization here with us, and he has invited myself to address the 100th anniversary session, commemorating the 100th anniversary of the ILO, along with other members. Obviously, there are about 40 other heads of government that have been invited to do so. But the Minister of Labour and the representatives of the labour movement traditionally go to the ILO every year, and Cabinet approved their continued attendance as usual. There are a number of other matters that are validation orders that will come out, and you'll see them gazetted in the official gazette, particularly where there are orders related to fees or any of those types of things. But the substantive policy issues are the ones that we have addressed with you here today. Before we end, I'll speak to you about the anniversary of the government after the questions, just before we end today. So we're available for any questions now.
I'll start. Ryan Broom, CBC News.
Can I say for future, we're going to need to have a mic for the questioners? Because if you're going live, people will not hear you unless you speak very loudly and or our mic.
I'll try to get.
Thanks.
Okay, Ryan Broom, CBC News. Minister Simmons, I referenced what you just said in terms of the cruise tourism especially. Has any consideration been given to given? I know this is not necessarily low hanging fruit, but a hotel plant closer to the seaport itself as a possibility to perhaps encourage more stay over.
Considerable consideration has been given to the possibility of hotel plant in the vicinity of the Bridgetown port. In fact, it was about 2 weeks ago that we hosted an investment conference here in Barbados where we had representatives from the tourism sector involved in hotel development, drawn from around the world. They were on island for about 4 days. And we did look extensively, not only in the area of Trevor's Way, but we also looked extensively at that entire Carlisle Bay strip, where I think that it is easy to say there are about 12 sites which are ripe for signature investment. And what really remains now is the expressions of interest on the part of hoteliers in a more formal way, because many of them have verbally expressed interest. And of course the fleshing out of the necessary regulatory arrangements which would govern concessions and build out, etc., etc. Obviously, those issues have to be settled before you can, on an individual basis, before you can go forward.
Thank you. Any other questions? If none, let me say at this stage that next week represents 1 year in government for this government. Indeed, next Friday, a week tomorrow, will be 1 year from the election, and the Saturday will be 1 year that myself and the Attorney General would have been sworn in. As a government, we understand that without thanks to God, we are nothing. And therefore, this morning, my staff was given permission to circulate that we will be attending James Street Church, Methodist Church, on Sunday morning at 9 a.m. for a Thanksgiving service as a party and as a government. And I'm taking off now my Prime Minister's hat and putting on political leader of the Barbados Labour Party's hat. And we will attend to give thanks on Sunday morning. Some may ask why we are doing it this Sunday as opposed to the next Sunday. And that is because this Sunday we give thanks and praise as one party, and next Sunday, all MPs will be giving thanks and praise in their individual constituencies, so that they will be able to celebrate with their constituents. Obviously, James Street Church has a limited amount of space, and therefore we believe that it is necessary to give thanks both together as a family, but also to give thanks in our constituency with our other family. And to that extent, the following Sunday we'll have the individual MPs attending service. In good old Barbadian style, we will have a public meeting and rally on the 25th of May, Saturday the 25th of May, is it at Carlisle Car Park. And unlike previous meetings, because it's a rally and because we have a lot to report, the meeting will start at 6 o'clock the evening as opposed to 7. And it's a Saturday evening, and there'll be a number of speakers and interspersed with some entertainment. But it is more about reporting to people and looking forward, and that is what we want to do on the 25th of May. And early the following week, I will then have an engagement with the country where, as Prime Minister, then I will report progress and speak to the way forward as we go forward again. So it's modest, it's not a lot of hurrah, hurrah, but it is by the same token reflective of the need first and foremost to give thanks, to take stock, and to set guard again as we move forward. And in all things I've said that we must stay the course, and you can only stay the course if you give thanks, reflect how far you've come, and set guard for the future journey. So without more, I'd like to thank you. Because of all of that activity, it is unlikely that we'll meet next week, so the following week will be responsible. We'll have a continued engagement, and as you will realize, ministers will change depending on the agenda of cabinet, as will the time, and it is because we leave you to go back to continue the work of cabinet. Thank you very much.